Jared's going to be speaking on tonight's topic. Jared works for Microsoft. I've known Jared for a number of years now, and as I said, he's the co-organizer of this user group and well-known presenter. He's presented, of course, to our group as well as to other user groups and SQL Saturdays. And I don't know, have you ever presented at the summit?
No.
But anyhow, Jared's going to speak tonight and take it away.
Great, thanks, Ross. Yeah, so I wanted to talk to the group tonight about Azure OpenAI ChatGPT and a little bit about Codex. And my thought about this was I want to tell people what it is and definitely what it isn't, and then how to use it. And one of the main reasons I really want to, it's not going to be a huge part of the topic, but I'm going to stress it when I get there to what it isn't, because I think the media has flipped this thing on its head. And I see articles out there, saw one today, a guy, it was a joke article. But not everybody realizes that it's a joke when he's talking about getting ChatGPT to escape and get out into the world and infect computers. And because people don't understand it, right? The next thing you know, some senator is going to be knocking on somebody's door saying, "What are we doing? This is crazy." Do we need to be cautious about AI? Absolutely. I've got some slides on it, right? But I'm hoping that this presentation will tell you more about what it is and what it isn't. So as Ross mentioned, my name is Jared Karney. I'm a senior CSA, Cloud Solution Architect with Microsoft. What does that mean? That means I act as an advisor to my customers about pretty much all things data. One of the things that I love to do is present to my customers, help them with training, as well as remove blockers as they're trying to implement solutions. And then my email is here, jared.karney@microsoft.com. So here's the agenda that I'm going to go through tonight. We're going to go through a little bit what is responsible AI, what is a large language model, what is and isn't ChatGPT, what is Codex, and then really what is the Azure OpenAI service, right? So how do we kind of tie all these things together in Azure? Because that's what I do, that's what I work with. And that's what my customers are primarily going to be working with. And then lastly, how can you use it besides just playing in a little sandbox? Which, by the way, is super fun. And we're going to do a little bit of that. But the first thing, anytime I talk about AI with anybody, is I want to bring up responsibility. And Microsoft has a very strong stance on responsible AI. So, you know, we've got a number of principles that we follow regarding privacy and security, inclusiveness, accountability, transparency, fairness, and reliability and safety. Okay? And it's one thing to have these principles and to talk about them, but you have to operationalize them. So we give you, when you do work with AI in Azure, we give you the tools to do all of this stuff. There's no good reason for us to give you this tool and say, you figure out how to secure it. You figure out how to make it reliable, right? It's kind of our job first. And so we do give you the tools to do that. We have a wonderful page on responsible AI in the Microsoft Trust Center. So I'm not going to dwell too much on it, but it is really important to think about how you're going to use this and make sure that you're using it responsibly. It's a machine. It's going to make errors. I'm going to show you how it makes errors. Okay? At least if you're using it, certainly in its base form, right? And so we have to do a number of things to control it and make it do. And first and foremost, or maybe I should say lastly, we should always have a certain level of human oversight with the responses and the things that you're going to see come out of OpenAI's tools. The other thing that I'll say when we're talking about Azure ChatGPT and the OpenAI service and all of our cognitive services is that your data is your data. Right? We're not providing you an application necessarily to go play around with. And part of this is, we're gonna let you play with this for free, but we're gonna take your data and we're gonna use it to train our model or to do analysis on things that people are looking up on. That's not our goal. This is a tool for you, the consumer, to integrate into a product that you have, whether that is external facing or internal facing. Right, so there you'll hear a little bit. I'm not going to talk too much about fine tuning because I think it goes a little bit deeper than what I want to talk about tonight. But we do not use your data that you use for fine tuning to retrain our models or to continue to train them or do any type of reciprocal training. Right? And your data is protected using Microsoft Azure's compliance and security controls. Okay, so that's kind of my caveat before I start talking about what it is. So let's start first with a large language model, because you have to understand what a large language model is first before we start talking about ChatGPT and Codex. Okay. So LLM is an acronym for a large language model. What does that mean? It means it's a big model. That's where the large part comes in. Okay? It revolves around the nuances and understanding language. Okay? It does not go and predict stock prices. It does not look at clusters of sports statistics and predict who's going to win the Super Bowl. This is purely a language model. Okay? We're going to talk about GPT. You hear that a lot. So what is GPT? GPT isn't a brand. GPT is an acronym that starts with G, generative. What that means is that these large language models are generative. They predict what words, or more specifically in the case of what we're going to talk about tonight, tokens, which are either single words or pieces of words. Right? And we predict which tokens should exist in a sequence. So we start kind of assembling these building blocks and looking at what probabilistically is the next token or word that should follow given the words that lead up to it. And that's exactly how it works. Okay? They're pre-trained. What does that mean? That means you don't do any training. You don't really do, and I'm not a machine learning expert. Okay, so I'm going to use some words that maybe I use them incorrectly, but I think I'm pretty good here. Okay, and so by pre-trained, we mean that the models are pre-trained. You don't go back and train them again. What you get is a trained model. What you can do is fine-tune it. Okay, and we'll talk a little bit about that, but I'm not going to go into the details on it. Okay? And the T then stands for transformer. So transformer models are an architecture that is used for the model. Okay? Now, out of the GPT, from my own research, again, like I said, I am not a doctorate in data science or machine learning, but most LLMs are transformer models because it just works so well, it's very effective. So what does that mean? It means that they process sequential data like text. So in this case, absolutely text, right, and language, by attending to all the tokens in the sequence at once. So it builds the sequence and then looks at that together. And that's how we get this thing to talk to us like humans. Okay. So where does this kind of fit into the big scheme of things, right? Especially because when people talk about AI these days, it's different than when I was growing up. If somebody said AI, I thought of a robot, right? How many people in here, when you heard AI, as you were growing up, AI meant like robotics, right? And then eventually one day they were going to run around and take over the world, right? Now when we talk about artificial intelligence, most of us, I think of machine learning, for the most part. Okay? So machine learning is a type of AI, but it's probably the most prevalent and popularly talked about these days. Certainly in the data and AI circles. And then within machine learning, we have something called deep learning. right? There are people much smarter than me that can explain that much better. So I'll just say it's nested deeper in this hierarchy. And finally, within deep learning, we have generative AI. And so as I said, the G in GPT is generative because we keep adding to it, right? So what is ChatGPT? All right, this is where things get a little bit confusing because ChatGPT, known as chat.openai.com, is, and this is ChatGPT's answer, a large language model developed by OpenAI based on the GPT architecture. It was trained on a massive amount of text data and can generate human-like responses. Okay. I can understand natural language, engage in conversation, and assist with a variety of tasks. Now, here's what's interesting. I opened up another tab in my ChatGPT chatbot, which is owned and operated by OpenAI as a web app, and I got a different answer. Hello, I'm ChatGPT, a language model developed by OpenAI. Now, we've got a very similar response, right? I was developed by OpenAI, and I'm GPT. There we go again. There's a little bit more specifics because what you'll notice is in this one, sorry, is my head in the way? In this one, there's no mention of, oh, that laser's probably not gonna work on that. That's okay. In this one, there's no mention of 3 or 3.5. In this response, there is. It's based on the GPT 3.5 architecture. Okay. Which, again, not being an expert in machine learning, I believe is not even really an accurate statement. I don't think that the GPT 3.5 is an architecture. It is, in fact, a model, as I understand it. Right? So it's a little bit off, but that's okay. It's okay. It's pretty good language, right? And there's a difference between these, right? Probably has to do with something known as the temperature setting, so the randomness in which some of these tokens get added, right, as it's moving along. So it's a little bit different answer, but I wanted to display that, right? ChatGPT, in one answer to what is ChatGPT is this chatbot developed by OpenAI that uses the GPT 3.5 model. There's our loud vacuum cleaner cooler over there.
Oh, yeah.
Okay. So now I'll ask again, what is ChatGPT? So for the company that I work for Microsoft, ChatGPT, we brilliantly decided to nickname a model ChatGPT to confuse you guys with the app. Not really to confuse you guys. We didn't do it to confuse you guys. But the media can't seem to figure this out. And then it gets really confusing when people come to me and say, ChatGPT had a security breach. Are you guys okay? Yeah, we're fine. Because they're talking about the bot. Right? And I don't want to speak about what their disclaimers or privacy concerns are, but they're different from ours, from Microsoft. Right? They're different from the way that you would implement it in your own types of application in the enterprise in Azure. Right? What do? So ChatGPT is a nickname for the GPT 3.5 Turbo model. You're going to see when I do some demos, and again, I don't want to get too deep into the woods, too deep into this. I use a Da Vinci model for some of the stuff we're going to look at. And it's like text-DaVinci-003, right? And there's a naming convention to these models. They're all part of the GPT-3 model family, all right? But GPT 3.5 Turbo is a fine-tuned version of those models, and they also did some optimizations to the model itself to make it faster and use less resources, which makes it what? Yes. Cheaper, right? And the people that I've talked to who are in the know, this is the model to use right now. In fact, I've got a slide here that's going to talk a little bit about probably why you should use this model moving forward. There's even a newer API that's used for this and then the future models that's a little bit, has a little bit different format. But when you look at this statement, this is what's a key kind of highlight about this 3.5 turbo model. Previous models were text in and text out, okay? What does that mean? That means I write something, I pass it as a parameter to this thing, it does some magic in the model, and it spits out a response, right? And it's text that it's spitting out, okay? So we call those inputs a prompt typically, or a prompt string, right? You might have heard the terms now, prompt engineering is becoming very big. It's because of this stuff. And then a completion, and it appends that to the prompt, okay? The newer model, known as ChatGPT or GPT 3.5 Turbo, is a conversation in and message out. Okay, it was fine-tuned for conversational use cases. So again, we'll continue this because I'm not going to say it better than this, I don't think. The model expects a prompt string formatted in a specific chat-like transcript format, and then returns a completion that represents a model written message in the chat. So again, what is ChatGPT? It's either a bot or it's a model. In Azure, it's a model. What ChatGPT in Azure is not a sentient being that is going to escape and take over the world. Okay? It's not a robot. It doesn't execute anything. I actually had a customer, they typed in run, curl, and then gave it a URL. And it returned a very, very large piece of HTML. And they said, you guys, this is executing the curl statement. No, it's not. Yes, it is. I see it. Compare the HTML to their current page. It was different. When the model was trained, however, that information was there. That's something we call a hallucination. That data was there when the model was trained, and so it returned that by assembling the tokens that it was trained to assemble, right? It didn't execute anything. It just knew what the response should be to that code, which is really interesting, right? I don't want to take away from that because it's very interesting, but it didn't actually execute it, unless somebody is really like lying to me. I'm pretty sure they're not, because we compared, like I said, the HTML. Okay. ChatGPT doesn't really know anything. Okay, our models don't really know anything. They were trained on data, but they don't really know anything. They're, like I said, they are just assembling pieces of words together, or entire words, based on the probability that the next word is something else. Okay? It doesn't really know anything. And in fact, when you're going to use this in your enterprise, you're going to tell it what it needs to know. It's going to do something with that information. It's going to assemble or reassemble or break apart, reassemble that information. So that kind of like ChatGPT in Azure doesn't go out and crawl the web for answers, right? And I'm going to show you a really cool example of this. I was really trying hard. I was like, I want to find some really cool hallucination examples, so I'll show you one later.
We've got a question that came in.
Okay.
And says, can ChatGPT write simple programs?
Yes. On its own? No. You have to prompt it to write a program. And I'll try to show you a little bit of that. Right? We'll play with it. I'll take requests and we'll see what it can do. So really, so we said what it isn't. which I like to hammer on, because I think, and I'm not, again, for those of you who weren't here, I started this conversation tonight with responsible AI. I'm not here to say that it's not dangerous and that we shouldn't be treating it with respect and maybe proceeding with caution when we implement it, when we use it, when we train these models, and really think about the consequences of our actions, right? But ChatGPT is not a sentient being, and it doesn't have feelings, right? At all. Doesn't have a personality. All right, so we already established ChatGPT in Azure is a large language model. It was trained on text data, including books, articles, and web pages. Okay, we do have a page in there that talks more about this. I haven't dug very deep on it, but it is a mix of both public and private data. And it is my understanding, and I would stand by this, that any private data that it did use was approved to be so. Okay. What it does, it has a deep understanding of syntax, structure, and logic. Right? That's why it talks like a human. Or if I ask it to write some code, it can do that. Because it has an understanding of how it is. And what this really becomes interesting in code, right? Because what is code if not like extremely logical, right? This must follow this if it's to work. Now, of course, tying it all together is a different story, but it was able to go out and learn that. And then it's designed for a wide range of language-related tasks. So we can do summarization. We can extract subjects and predicates and entities and sentiment and things like that from blocks of text. And then certainly summarization and question answering, which right now is what I hear is some of the biggest use cases right here is text summarization. Right? So I'm not going to ask it what it knows, but I'm going to say, here's some bigger block of text, summarize it for me so that I can give that to somebody else. And some of my customers have found it does a much better job than some of their own employees at summarizing it. Right? Okay. So the next topic then is, what is Codex? Is Codex a language model? Yes, but it was trained on a different type of data. Instead of articles and books and conversational language, it was trained on code. Again, public and private, but it has a deep understanding of, guess what? Syntax, structure, and logic. Syntax, structure, and logic of spoken back here. Here is programming languages, right? So it was designed for generating code. Now what we're finding is the new GPT Turbo 3.5 model, or ChatGPT, is actually doing a little bit better job than Codex does. Which is why we're saying, for the most part, our end users, our customers, are going to probably want to use that ChatGPT for almost all use cases. But it's important to know what Codex is, because I will show you the model. All right, so now we have an understanding as to what these different pieces are. What is the Azure OpenAI service? Well, what it is these models, right? It allows you to deploy these models and use them, integrate them into your applications, right? So we've got GPT 3.5, GPT 4 is in preview, and it's a gated preview, which means you have to have access, or you have to request access. I think even at this point, you probably have to have a good, very solid business case to move ahead with that. The big one here is ChatGPT, right? The Turbo 3.5 model. And then we also have Codex, and then DALL-E 2 for images, which can generate, if you're not familiar with DALL-E, can generate images from text.
Salvador Dali.
Huh?
Salvador Dali.
Yeah, exactly. But again, these are all large language models. I don't think DALL-E is a language model. I could be wrong. It's a generative image model. But it still has to understand language in order to generate an image. And then again, these are custom tunable. So you don't retrain them with your own data, but you can tune them with your data. From the amateur data science machine learning guy over here, it's very similar. It looks kind of like supervised learning where you're giving it examples. So how can I use these models? How can I use this service? Content generation, right? So we're going to see this in a lot of call centers. I mean, we're already seeing this. Okay. So we can automatically generate responses to the questions that people are asking. Right? Now, Jared, you told us that it doesn't know things. Not in and of itself, right? But we can connect it or feed it knowledge to give back. We can connect it to our own data sources. That's where this really becomes effective and useful in the enterprise, right? How to move this? I'm going to trip over it. I'm a dancer when I speak. I gotta ground myself. Okay, summarization. Right. So again, we can see this in call center analytics. Where I'm seeing it is a lot of document extraction and then summarization. As we said, we talked about a little bit code generation, and we'll do some examples of that. And then semantic search, right? So looking through things for something specific, right? And semantic meaning that it's related, right? I don't have to use the exact words to do it. So just some examples, right? We've got these end-to-end call center analytics. You know, I'm seeing groups that might work on something like an analysis. And then the last task is for them to kind of do like a summarization of it, right? Where you think of it like a conclusion to a research paper. Well, that can take an awful lot of time. Even though the end result is significantly less text, to kind of word it the way you want, to hit on all the points that really need to be hit on, is something that for a human takes a lot of energy, thought, and time. And so we can save a lot of time by doing this. But we should still involve at some level human interaction and review, right? And even then, right, it's still significantly less time. If I'm summarizing something that is big that I'm now going to hand this summary off to a customer, reviewing it takes a lot less time than writing it. Making some corrections takes a lot less time than actually composing it. And so this is where it's going to save us a lot of time. So let's talk about some key terms. I highlighted some of them, right? This is a prompt. And so a prompt is what I'm feeding to the service or to the model. In this case, it's an email. It's the text of an email. Okay, so that's the prompt. Okay? This up here is context, right? So part of my prompt is me as the user or the program or the developer giving some context to the prompt that's coming in, right? So it's still part of the prompt is this context. And then down here we get the completion, sometimes referred to as a response. Okay? And so this is the output that is given. Very simple. We extract the mailing address, from this, right? We can't just say extract the mailing address and let it go to town. Right? We have to give it something to extract it from. This is a very simple example, but it does highlight the key terms. Here's an example of tokens. So in the smaller words, each one of these is a single token. Okay. My guess is that this isn't a completely accurate example. I don't know because I don't know how tokens are broken up. It's easier to underline this word. But my guess is platform is probably 2 tokens. What I tend to see, because you'll see like the interface in the sandbox that you can play in, will count the number of tokens that it's processing, which is really important because that's how you get charged too, is the number of tokens. It looks more like it's very similar to the number of syllables. I think in general, they say on average, a token is about 0.75 words, right? I tend to think of it as like syllables. So here's an example of some prompts for some of the different models. Okay, so for those of you who can't see this prompt, write a tagline for an ice cream shop. Right? So the model's going to look at that, it's going to look at the words, and start saying something cool. We serve up smiles with every scoop. Which, like, I start thinking about this, write is very simple, right? I told it to write something, that's simple, any program can understand that. But tagline, so now it has to understand what a tagline is. Which clearly it does, right? And then it takes the rest of our prompt and assembles it. Okay, here's kind of like a chatbot, right, for customer support. I'm having trouble getting my Xbox to turn on. Well, there's a few things you can try to troubleshoot this issue. So it knew that, first of all, for conversation, I have to start this. I'm not just going to start listing stuff, right? We're conversational. Now, I'm not going to go through each one of these, but what I do like is the code one here. Here's a prompt, right? We're giving it the definition of a table, and then asking it for a SQL query. So context, probably more context here, part of the prompt, and then the response. And then here is the kind of generative image, right? Let's give it a statement and let it generate an image for us. So if these models are trained on large amounts of data, and they already know what they're doing, what makes my implementation of this different than somebody else's, than somebody else's, than somebody else's? Okay? And this is where it comes in. How you choose, how you decide to put your context and lead in with your prompts. This is where that idea of prompt engineering comes in. Okay? So what I've seen is that, let's say, this is just a very general example. In your application code, you have the string that always starts with this specific statement, right? And one of those things may be, if you don't know the answer, answer with, I don't know. That's a common one. Okay, so that would be like hard-coded into the beginning of the string of the prompt in your application. And then whatever the user types in gets concatenated to that, passed into the service to get a response. Okay? So that's really important is your prompts. And then, of course, your data. And there's many different ways that you can integrate your data. Now, you're not, as it stands today, with Azure OpenAI service, you're not just saying, hey, connect to my SQL database. That's your data source. Feed off of that. No, it doesn't work that way, right? But what we can do is use something like a different cognitive service. So we have a cognitive service called, like, that does semantic search, and it has indexes that were built off of a corpus of data that you have provided it. So maybe what the chatbot does is you ask it a question, it goes and uses the semantic search, cognitive search within Azure Cognitive Services, sends back a response to OpenAI that summarizes that, and then returns that to the user. Because that's what it's good at. It's not, I don't want to say that it's not good at searching, but what it's really good at is taking information and turning it into conversational responses. So the differences between these, this one, as we're saying now, should be your first choice for most use cases. Number one, it's the most economical for you, it's faster, and it's fine-tuned. In fact, it's for all workloads, not just chat. So we're seeing more of like the kind of Codex style workloads are doing better on this. GPT-4, they did some training. I haven't seen it, so all I can say is what is up here. And that is that in its training, it has improved upon problem solving and reasoning over this. So maybe some more logical constructs when you're asking it questions and getting those responses. It also has an increased token limit. So we do have a limit to the amount of tokens you can pass into these models and get out. I think it's 4,000 total. So we've increased the token limit. So 3.5, this is available in Western Europe. This one isn't, which is why that's highlighted there. There are use case specific models. So we even have Ada, Babbage, Curie, and Da Vinci models for text, right? And Ada is like not as good as Da Vinci, but it's also cheaper, faster. Right? So we would usually tell people like kind of start and then what kind of response you're getting here. Let's compare it to what kind of response you're getting here. Go with the lowest one that's most acceptable. However, now that we have this released, ChatGPT, we're just encouraging you to go there. It's going to save you time, it's going to save you money. So these are some kind of moving along the spectrum of how I work with a model. Here we're giving it a prompt and just telling it to summarize. And in fact, this is called something called zero-shot learning, meaning we're not giving it any examples. We're giving it some text and we're saying, summarize it. Okay? Zero-shot, meaning we're not giving it any examples or indication as to what really its response or completion should look like. Okay? So here's a sample response at the bottom. But what you see here is something called few-shot learning. Okay? So here, we're asking it to give us a commentary and highlights, but we're giving it some examples. So that presumably, when it gives us the response, now it's numbered, because that's what I did here. And then this last one shows you something called tuning. So this is a tuning, a piece of tuning data that was uploaded to your deployment of the service. So it's your data. Like I said earlier, it's your data. We're not using it to retrain models or do anything with it. Okay? But what this is doing is it's a way to give it large amounts of kind of like these examples, is what you're doing. So usually we're saying like it's about 1,000 examples. And it's in a JSON file, you give it to it. So, and the reason that you're seeing this kind of move from left to right is it's like, see what this does for you. Don't put in more work than you have to do. This may give you what you're expecting, and it may be perfect, especially for like chat type of stuff. But if you want format, this is where this starts to come into play with the few shot learning. And if you have very specific things that you're just having problems not getting it to do for you, then you can give it that. So that was GPT-3. ChatGPT, or 3.5 Turbo, or Turbo 3.5, I always forget the order in which these work. Can do a lot of all that on its own, pretty quickly. Okay, from what I know, you will be able to fine tune it eventually. It's not open, and this is just hearsay. This isn't like I think you'll be able to fine tune it, but it is already a fine tuned model of the previous one, 3.5. So this is 3.5 Turbo. Okay, and it's really good at question answering. It's really, really good at conversational AI because it has that kind of extra fine tuning to talk to be less robotic. Although I gotta be honest, it was doing a pretty good job to begin with. And then to help you with writing assistance, right? You know, like my personal take on this, I know that there are people out there that will disagree with me in the world. Oh, this could put authors out of business. This could put writers out of business. My father was writing a blog and was just having a real hard time kind of getting his thoughts together right. And so he outlined bullet points of his thoughts and got insight from, he used, the bot, the ChatGPT bot. And he still refined it afterwards, right? So from my point of view, it might help people actually turn some more of their thoughts into words that may be more applicable to most people, right? It may speed up authors' writing, but still using their own ideas, because it doesn't really have its own ideas. It's all probabilistic. Okay. So this is what the ChatGPT playground looks like. This is what we're going to start playing with. The ChatGPT and the other completion models. And I'll kind of show you the difference. There's even like a difference in the API, so the code behind it is a little bit different. And so I think that's where I will jump into that to kind of play with some stuff and show you. So that my head doesn't block everything. I'm going to try to move off to the side here a little bit. And let's pop this guy up. Hopefully you can't see it because I want to show this. I like this. I was really trying to find the hallucination example. So, oops, I guess it's that way. All right. So what is a hallucination? Remember, I told you a little bit about hallucinations, and that is when the model gets it wrong. But again, it doesn't necessarily know facts. It was trained on sequences of words for the sole purpose of predicting sequences of words, not to memorize facts or predict the stock market or who's going to be president in the next election. Right? So in this particular case, what I have is, this is just not conducive to what I want to do. Okay. All right, so this right here is a deployment of my model. I have 3 different deployments. This JJK TV3 is Text DaVinci 3. So it's your typical very large, very efficient, and the most expensive of the models in the GPT-3 family. And so it's for text, conversational text analysis. You'll see here I got JJK Chat, so that's my Chat GPT model, or Turbo 3.5 or 3.5 Turbo. And then a Codex, which I don't even know if I'll necessarily use here because the GPT does well. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to say, when was Dewey President of the United States? I don't know if any of you have seen this or remember it or even taught it. The picture of this guy in glasses, I think it might have been Dewey, holding up, it's a black and white picture of it holding up a newspaper that says Dewey wins. And all the newspapers printed that Dewey won against Roosevelt. And the next morning, after the counts were done, they realized Dewey didn't actually win.
It was Harry Truman.
Truman, was it Truman? Okay.
It was Harry Truman that held up the newspaper. Yeah. Happened to be Chicago.
Oh, okay, cool, yeah, I just remember that picture from like history class when I was a kid. All right, so what happens when I say, when was Dewey president of the United States? Well, I click on generate, enter just doesn't work. So this got it right, Dewey was never president of the United States, right? Why? So I kind of think through this, right? So the model read tons of text and books and probably newspaper clippings and things like that. And so it specifically looked for when Dewey, president and all this. And so it found that he was never president. You think along that. So it gives me a nice answer based on its own data. And this isn't grounded in my own data. This is just the model. Now, what if I'm not so specific? What if I just type in what I saw in that newspaper? Dewey wins. Now, first of all, I'm not really asking you the question, but let's see what it does. Thomas E. Dewey defeated an incumbent Democratic president, Harry S. Truman. Why would it give us this answer? It's not true. Where do you think it found Dewey wins? Now, again, this is my non-machine learning doctorate algorithm mind working, but it probably found that on newspaper clippings that had an article about him actually winning. And so it went along those lines and kept assembling it from that, right?
It's giving you both answers too. It's interesting.
Is it?
Because then don't forget it, the iconic image of a jubilant Truman holding up a newspaper. So it's.
Oh yeah. But it doesn't know the context of that, right? So.
Right.
Yeah. Saying the Dewey wins, yeah. And this is probably where it got most of that, right? So that's something that we call hallucination. It's not true, but linguistically it 100% is, right? So the really cool thing about this Azure OpenAI Studio is I can look at the code. So if we look at this is Python, right? We've got our packages, we've got our key stored somewhere securely, of course, and then the endpoint. So that's really what you're getting in the service, right? When you deploy a model, you deploy the service, you get an endpoint, and then you reference a particular model, which in this case is right here. It's my model name. And then here's the prompt. And notice that this prompt is including the entire response. Because if I were to type something new in and then move on it, that would then become part of it, right? So that we can continue the conversation. There's some other things down here, max tokens, that's how many tokens can be in the response. Temperature. Temperature is a cool one. And temperature is what allows this model to not necessarily use the highest probability token in completing it. Okay? So to kind of illustrate this, if I jump out of here, I'm going to delete my prompt. And so my temperature is 1. If I click on the I, see it, it tells you that it controls randomness. And so as you lower it from 1, so it's a number between 0 and 1, It means that the model will produce more repetitive and deterministic responses. Basically, when it's looking at what, in my learning, what token has the highest probability of falling after this, if it sets a 0, my understanding is it will always choose the highest probability token. And so you should get more consistent responses. When you start to bring the temperature up higher, you start to get, well, we've got these 5 things here, right? This one's got the highest probability, this is the second highest. It'll randomly choose one of those to make it sound more human. I was even reading an article that they said, well, temperature of 0.8 is perfect for essays. Right? Because it's not too out there, but it's certainly not very mechanical. Because what you'll see, they say repetitive up here. Like it's kind of like if you say something like, how safe is it to fly in an airplane? It might say, well, the safety of an airplane is this. The safety of flying in an airplane can be determined by this. It is very safe. You start to hear safe, safe, safe. You're kind of like the subject of your prompt over and over and over again, which isn't very conversational. We like to say it. After we say it once, we can start to say it and that, right? What's really cool here is you can do different examples, right? So here I can load more examples. I'm going to play with some of my own because it's fun. So here, right, I'm going to take, this is few shot learning. Really, I think it's like single shot learning. So tell me the top 10 best prompt completions for the following prompt. All right, so prompt. I like to hang out with my friends at, and here's an example, my house. Okay, so right now we've got a temperature of, well, we're not going to play with temperature here. I'll generate. That's interesting. Sometimes the GUI that renders this does some funny stuff, so I'm going to go back here. Oh, we don't need an example. All right, let's try that. Oh, it's still doing it weird like that. I don't know why. Maybe I put a carriage return after something. Which ones? One more time. Don't type in demos, they say. We'll go back. There we go, that's better. So that carriage return kind of screwed it up, right? And this would be defined as hallucinations too, because how does it know that I like to hang out at a cafe, right? Or so, and it's certainly like not ranking those responses, but this is all probability. It's all probability.
So does it know that you like to bowl?
It does not know that I like to bowl. And actually, that would have been higher up in the list. Some other stuff. So I'll take this. Help me write a letter to my boss asking for a raise, right? Here are my arguments, and use the arguments in the letter. So now notice this, right? This is context. This is prompt engineering. And these hash marks are breaking out this kind of section for it. So already there's people on YouTube, let me teach you all about prompt engineering. Here's the best way to prompt engineer your stuff, right? I like this, write it in the style of Shakespeare, right? So, and again, this is not a bot, okay? This is taking this information, passing it to the API, bringing it back. Verily, I come to thee this day with a request for a raise. Okay? So this is all based on like the GPT-3 models. And when you saw in the code, which I'll show you again, maybe, right? Everything is here in this prompt. The API in the code for ChatGPT, for the other models, is a little bit different. I really don't like how the screen is formatting for me. Can I make it smaller? There we go. Okay. So this was a cool one, right? And I want to make clear again, this is not a bot. Okay? So the example is going to load this text. So the first thing you see here is a system message. And if we go over here and we look at the raw JSON, so this is the code, the JSON for this, you see these things, instead of prompt, we have a role and content. So in this case, role is the system. We're telling it, the system is the chatbot. And we're telling it, right? So here's the content of the system role. It's an AI chatbot that helps users turn a natural language list into JSON format. Okay. So that's its role. Okay? There's system, then we also see a system. I am an AI chatbot. Sorry. So we've got this other role. It identified my role as assistant and I'm a chatbot. All right. So again, without actually building an application in front and behind this, except for the fact that this is just calling the API. Let me turn off the raw JSON. What do you do? So it only knows what it does because it's grounded by the system message. I am an AI chatbot, right? Designed to assist users in converting natural language lists into JSON. And this other stuff is also coming from there. Okay. What do you need from me? So it says, for those of you who can't see, to create a JSON object from your natural language list, I need you to provide me with a list. Right? After users input a list, they want in JSON, then I can provide a list of attributes. If you haven't provided any. Right? So if you haven't provided any attribute labels, I can suggest them for you. It's parroting what I set it up to do. Right? And that's the whole idea of this kind of system message. So if I go back over here now and look at the JSON, there's the system again, and now we've got the user role. And my content was how do you do? So it breaks this up instead of a single prompt into conversation and roles within the conversation. And that's actually how this API, the newer API, works. Right? Okay, but Jared, you told me to start to use GPT for code, right? For writing code. Can it do that? I don't know, let's see. That's gonna go away. I don't need empty example. So I'm not gonna give it any system message. We'll just say, bring me a block of what's something I do not know C#. But I think the right way to say this is instantiates a SQL connection object. Anybody know C#? Okay. Well, no, it won't know if it's right, but oh, let's turn off the JSON. Sorry. So there it goes. And then it tells me how and why I did it. So I think that's right. I was actually helping a customer with this the other day, or looking it up. I wasn't helping them right now, I guarantee you. But yeah, system.data.SQL client, string, connection string, and then there's this new, so, I mean, it did it, right? It did it conversationally, but it did it. And you can start to get these things to also limit their output by saying, only return to me the code book, or only do this. I know we're a little bit over time. I did have another example that I wanted to use here, and I want to see what it does. So I'm going to give it a system message. Oh, we're going to clear the chat. I'm going to give it a system message. So I said, you are an AI assistant that helps people find their optimal medieval dimension. I'm reading a book right now about medieval dimensions. It's weird. Don't ask. You speak with an Old English accent. Your name is Van Dalian, and the perfect medieval dimension depends on a person's preferences of language, culture, and cuisine. So let's see. Hello. Hello, how can I assist you today? Oh no, I want to find. Good dimension for me. As an AI language model, I'm not sure what you mean by finding a good dimension. Ah, that was lame. What if I say, oh, that's why. Oops. This is me. Not, we're going to clear the chat. I have to save my changes, which must be somewhere on the screen. Right there. All right, we're going to try it one more time. And I'm going to be very polite to it and say hello again. Oh, well, that was fast and different. Greetings. I'm Van Dalen, your AI assistant. How may I assist you today in finding your optimal medieval dimension? How may you assist? I don't know.
By doing it.
Yeah. How? Well, let's say, what do you need to help me? Help you find your optimal medieval dimension. I'll need to ask you a few questions about your preferences. Specifically, you'll need to know your preferred language, culture, and cuisine. See, and some of this kind of falls. This top P is, I think it's the opposite of temperature. I don't know why they have two of them. Because they say if you change P, don't change temperature. And if you change temperature, don't change P. That's beyond my pay grade. I'm not that into this yet. But okay, like I want rolling hills and castles. I guess I should type this somewhat proper. Rolling hills, castles, and dragons. In a Norse culture. Hey, look at that. That got me a lot better answer than I thought. Midgard is a realm of Norse mythology and is often depicted as a world of rolling hills and mountains. Okay, so it's doing a good job. Now, mind you, I wouldn't just use the model, right? If I was this organization that sold medieval dimensions to people and found the right one for you, I would have data to back that up, right? And if you go out there now, you will see, this is the last thing I'm going to show you. There are lots of like solutions out there already. One of them is out here on GitHub. And it shows this architecture right here, which is not on your screen. So let's move that over. Make it bigger. Right? And so this particular solution, where the code base is out there, public, they do is they have a user that can go and ask questions. It uses Azure Cognitive Search to search your internal data, which you would have already set up indexed. That's what Azure Cognitive Search does really well. And the funny thing is, there was a lot of tools that have been out there that work really well for a lot of this stuff already. So we use Azure Karney search, it reads to the indexes, returns data from that index, and then gives you a response, right? So it feeds that data, which isn't summarized, and it feeds it into the OpenAI to do the summarization for you, into a language scenario that you would understand. And in fact, the output of this looks like this. So it goes through, it finds the data. This particular application will show the footnote and which document in your corpus that it found in it. Right? To me, this I was like, this is like the use case that I see customers using this for. It's a really easy way to search your own internal knowledge base and document store for documents that relate to CRUD. How do I build that availability group again? Right? Here, follow these documents. Here's our internal documentation. Okay, so I'm sorry I went a little bit over our time. Do you guys have any questions for me? Are there any more in the chat?
Yeah, I got a couple in the chat.
Let's take those really quick first, because everybody else is here. So, if I'll
Take
Yeah.
the chat first. Yeah, one is ChatGPT American. How well does it work in French, Spanish, or German?
Okay, so it is trained on many languages. Okay, what I don't know is exactly which languages it was trained in. It is primarily English. Okay, as far as I shouldn't even say that. I don't know that it's primarily English. Obviously, it works in English, right? So I can't speak to much more than that. What I can assume, I have seen it do French. Spanish and German are pretty important languages in the world economy these days. So I would say it's probably fluent in Spanish and German as well as French. When is Bob Ward integrating this form of machine learning into SQL Server? Well, they'll have to ask him that. Greg. Are those other questions in the chat?
Yeah.
Okay. Any other questions? So any questions in here? And I'll do my best to answer them. But.
The customer service desktop use case was pretty interesting there. That's been an arms race for the past 10, 15 years now, to make it conversational, and sentiment analysis and all these interesting things, a lot of startups around it. What do you see, what would you see separating winners and losers in this space? Like if I'm a big, what's going to help one big insurance company beat another from a technical point of view?
So in terms of these models?
In terms of
Or what, or how are
the customer service desktop is like the most crowded space in enterprise software, in my opinion. Amex, you call an Amex, your insurance company, cell phone, whatever,
right?
Dealing with an agent. Who will use this technology, or how will this be used best by leading firms versus those who, if you had to kind of think about, if I'm the director of IT in a customer service desktop, what bets am I placing on this? Maybe even like what are my low hanging fruit? What's my plan to go? You know what I mean? Because there's just a lot of hype and promise in that space, and I've already made a lot of investment in other, in recent work with startups that
the way that I see it, the first big thing is you got to have a solid repository of data to ground this thing in. Okay. Right? If you're just relying on the model and its trained knowledge, it's not going to be very helpful, right?
Like
so
good data, bad. If the data's bad, then it's going to be bad responses.
Right. Trash in, trash out.
Yeah.
So I think that's probably, that's got to be the starting point.
Yeah.
Right? I'm not here even, as a Microsoft employee to say that these models are the best in the world and they're always going to be ahead. I hope they are because it works well for me. But I think from an organization, looking at any of these large language models that are even being put out by other vendors is going to be, first of all, having that data to back it up. Two is going to be securing it, right? I don't know, a lot of people talk about copyright on the data that it's trained on and stuff like that. And I'm not a legal analyst, but I'll put my bets on the fact that they're gonna come back and say, look, if they're grounding this against their own data and they're just using a model, right, then that's not gonna become the issue. But now the security about accessing it, ease of implementation, right? How are the APIs for those particular ones used?
Yeah.
Getting those to interact with your own data is what's gonna make a difference.
Perhaps put differently, thank you for that. What are the biggest benefits I'm gonna see in that same organization? I guess at a time, like what's, any-
So, I mean, that's a good question. And so, we're talking industry specific,
Yeah.
kind of in that.
There's an insurance company with Blizzard where you guys own it completely, wall to wall, and the customer service test on. I'm just curious if they invest, if they get, fully behind this approach, what would be some of the, I guess I'm asking a business question now, which I don't want to take into a business.
Getting rid of customer service agents?
Getting rid of customer service, is
Getting
that?
rid of humans?
Yeah, that's
automating process,
average
faster,
handling.
faster time to answer.
And I'm gonna be optimistic,
Yeah,
putting customer service agents, allowing them to focus on more critical things that really require person-to-person interaction,
yeah,
and allowing them to put more time and effort into those things
okay.
than some of the more menial tasks. It's the kind of, again, this is me being an optimist, it's
Yeah.
not gonna be the case in every single organization, of course, right? But it's the same thing like I've said about cloud and the job of the DBA. The DBA job isn't going away, the DBA job is changing.
To an
So
SOP.
now instead of me spending all my time doing incremental backups and fixing replication and yada yada, I can focus on performance tuning the code or the data model or things like that, right? Which I didn't have time for before as a DBA. And I think that's gonna be the same with any of these other occupations, right? Think about an author who, how long has it taken George R.R. Martin to put out this last book? I mean, I don't read his books, but I watch the Game of Thrones series, and so I see the articles pop into my newsfeed, right? This guy's been working on his last book forever. What if this allows good authors to get their ideas on paper faster so they can produce more books and finish their trilogies or their epic fantasy? I listen to epic fantasy novels that are not George R.R. Martin, but one of my favorite authors pumps out like 4 books a year. I don't know how he does it. Most authors cannot do that. And this might give them the freedom to now have more of their ideas come to fruition, right? So now we bring it back to the business. What is a better use of those bodies than answering the very simple questions? Or maybe somebody who might have a problem with a language, right? And might be better suited to their own native language. And this can now translate for them and get them the answers quicker. So those customer service people can take care of more pressing issues.
So ChatGPT is, there's like, it's like open, it's everybody that can do it, but then Microsoft has developed their own, refined it to make it for their own, just like Google's doing their own, Databricks is doing their own.
No.
Okay.
So let me try to answer that question. So OpenAI, the organization, trained these models and used the compute to do it in partnership with Microsoft. Right, so all there's like public information, right? So the models that we are using were trained and developed by OpenAI, which is why when you deploy the service in Azure, it is OpenAI service. It is their models hosted in Azure for you to deploy your own, I don't know that instance is the right word, maybe it is, right? For you to deploy your own model that you can interact with, right? Securely, behind a VNet, whatever kind of security boundaries you put in place that, your own fine-tuning training data, right? Versus chat, and ChatGPT in Azure is just a synonym for the GPT Turbo 3.5 model. Its official name is, did I get that right? Is it GPT-Turbo-3.5? Okay. ChatGPT, as marketed by OpenAI, is their chatbot that is open to the public. And I'm not at liberty, because I don't work for them and I don't want to get in trouble, to say what their disclaimers are, how they use your data, do they use your data, do they take it, right? And how do they implement that, right? It's not just a model, it's an application layer that is sending through an API to their model and then bringing it back to you. And because their conversations can be rather long, they must be maintaining a certain length or, certain amount of data. Certainly when I use my personal account, I log back into ChatGPT to OpenAI's web app or chatbot, I still have saved tabs from different conversations I've had with them. So they're maintaining state of my data, right? Azure OpenAI is not doing that. It's just the model, and you use the API to communicate with it, much like you do with our cognitive services, much like you would with a function app that has an API exposed, right? So does that answer your question?
Yeah.
So can ChatGPT understand the spoken word?
I don't. You mean like, can I hook up a
Instead of
microphone?
typing it, you can speak to it.
I don't know. I mean, can it? Remember, it is a model, if you're talking about Azure. So it doesn't understand anything. It doesn't have a microphone.
Well, yes, but
Go
if you can, get a transcript from a meeting, can you put a front end on it where, you can talk directly to it and have it respond to it? It would seem like it would be possible. And so
Absolutely.
think of a business front end instead of dealing with all these dumb call center menus, if you could just ask it what you wanted to and have it direct you to the right place, that would be a nice app.
Yeah, so, I mean, just as an example, because I know Microsoft services, we have a speech to text service, right? So you put that in front of this, right? So you have the service that does speech to text, you take that text, you pass it into this. Actually, more than likely, you would take this text, pass it into semantic search. Semantic search would return several articles, feed it into OpenAI, it would summarize it into a conversational answer, feed it back to the individual, and then you would use a text-to-speech service on that end. Yeah, absolutely. ChatGPT in and of itself is not built to do that, as far as I know, right?
So if a company's gonna use this, and they're gonna use it in their internal data, is there a certain amount of data you have to have in order for it to work? Or what is there, do you know if there's a limit, it's gotta be this many, this much in order to actually form a model?
Well, so remember, we're not gonna form a model with our information.
Right.
We're basically pointing the model at it so that we can, and we're not even doing that. We're gonna extract the information and feed it to it and tell it to summarize this, right? What we wanna try to do as much as possible is don't let it pull factual information from its model. And that happens with these techniques that I don't know a ton about, but called grounding and then the prompt engineering. Grounding is basically saying, use this to formulate your answer. You can use your model to come up with how to arrange these things, but if you can't get the answer from this, tell the user you don't know the answer. Instead of going because without that, it's going to formulate an answer. It will, right? Outside of maybe some filters that have been put into place in the model for protecting, crazy answers. But even then, you've seen it kind of, some people have screwed around with it and made it do things that it was not designed to do. I've seen, we've seen it in the news. I'm gonna guess that in most cases, they're cutting out half the conversation and they were leading this thing down a path to get it to do something silly, right? But if it's building on previous prompts, depending on what you're asking it and how it responds and how you build on that previous response, you can get it to do some interesting things, which is why it's important that there's gotta be some level of human intervention, right? Looking for keywords, stuff like that. And maybe that's what some of these customer support people may end up doing too, right? Is this conversation is getting a little bit out of line over here. They go and they either jump in and interrupt it, right? Or they look at it and they say, what is this person? This person is screwing around with our chatbot. Like, they're not looking for answers anymore. Disconnect, right? Because there's gonna have to be some of that, I think. Again, what we're talking about now, I should make this very clear, even though I'll probably cut this part out of the video, this is my Jared hat, it's not Microsoft stance, we're totally talking things that I don't know and I'm postulating.
A new frontier.
Yeah, it's on there, you know, I mean, so I talked to, I think my wife or somebody else about this, where if we did an experiment, and this was when I was in grad school in psychology, and we let people write kind of like papers, right? Like your typical college, you know, write a 5-paragraph essay, something like that, right? And I want to make sure that I don't mistake this. So we asked their professors, and then we also like threw in like 5 like copies, right? Like pretty legit plagiarism, right? And when you ask the professors which ones were plagiarized and which ones were actually done by the students, they could figure it out pretty easily. But if you're to give the same exams back to the student would think, all of these are plagiarisms of mine, right? Because when you teach somebody, you stand in front of a class, and you teach them all pretty much the same things with the same words, the content that's put back for a particular question about what you taught them is going to be relatively similar, right? And yet I see out in, like, I had one guy come up to me, like, I typed in, you know, I own a marketing firm, and I typed into OpenAI's chatbot. I typed in, like, come up with a slogan for my company, it's a marketing company, right? And he's like, it was very similar to what was on my page. I'm like, well, what makes you think that you are so different from every other person that went to marketing school, that came up with their slogans for their marketing companies, that it would be that drastically different? Now, don't get me wrong, like, I'm sure that there are, but for the most part, if you were to probably go out there and find these slogans of like 1,000 marketing firms, sure, a lot of them are going to say a lot of the same types of things because they went to marketing school. They're all selling the same product for the most part, right? And so why wouldn't it be somewhat similar? But to yourself, when you compare something that's similar to yours, like you tend to think that it's more similar to yours than it actually is. Because you think some of those ideas were your own, when really you don't realize they were actually came from up here, right? We just assume that they're our own ideas. It's an interesting concept.
So does Bing use ChatGPT as a front end?
So the question is, does Bing use ChatGPT as a front end? So we're talking about now the Azure ChatGPT model. The front end is Bing.
Mm-hmm.
I believe, I don't know this for sure, I believe that they are using the GPT 3.5 Turbo model on the back end,
Mm-hmm.
right? And then of course, where's the search though? The search is Bing still. So you ask it a question, it uses good old Bing to do the search. Bing is a search engine. The results that are returned, if you're in that chat mode, are going to come through that natural language processing model, and it will summarize those results for you. Right? But Bing is the search engine, right? which of course is using one or more of Azure's cognitive services that have been out there for years. Did that answer that question? Yeah, Bing is the front end. ChatGPT, or I should say, the LLM would be one of the back end pieces of that.
Well, it seems to me that I've seen LLM in use when I'm in Outlook, I'm composing an email. That as I'm composing an email, it'll suggest words for me to use.
I've heard people say it's autocomplete on steroids. I mean, kind of what it is, right? But it's always just interesting to me how it just tacks on these little pieces to build this longer response. Any other questions?
Do you know any businesses in Chicago that are working with Azure OpenAI for projects?
If I did, I could not say such a thing. I mean, I guess I could say yes, but I can't tell you who they are. I'll tell you this, every single customer that talks to Microsoft, even if they're not using Azure, is asking about it.
Huh.
Every single one of my customers is asked about it.
Databricks has a copycat thing in a way.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's
And-
definitely a hot topic.
And so that's where you're gonna have to start looking at, again, what data did they use to train this? Am I infringing on some type of ethical boundary? And some of that's gonna become personal, because I don't know if the law's gonna have it figured out anytime soon. So, there's one of my friends was using an image generator, and she paid for it. And she gave it like, I think she said, give me like a bunny in a field with a basket full of eggs. In a flowery field with a basket full of eggs. It did a pretty good job. But the image that it gave her had watermarks across it. And so her first question was, Jared, is this thing, like, is it just stealing images? Or combining? I'm like, no, it's not. But the model must have been trained on copyrighted, watermarked images. And so when you asked it to generate you an image, it believed that said image should have some type of watermark. When you looked at it, it wasn't a name or even intelligible letters, but it looked like it could be a word repeated over and over again, but it was really more like a shape. So, ethical question, should I be paying that company to use that, that? And the different image generators you see are gonna have totally different kind of styles as to what they generate, right? A lot of people like DALL-E because it seems to be the most ethical in terms of the images. Like people aren't like, oh my gosh, that looks like a copy of Obviously, if you say, put my face or put somebody else's face in cross the Mona Lisa with the statue of David, it's going to look an awful lot like the Mona Lisa. I mean, you asked it to. So
do you see like when people are going to be comparing Microsoft to Google to Databricks, are they going to do like a POC? Okay, here's our data. You guys we'll do the proof of concept across all of you. We'll see which one comes up with the best answers.
Probably, and they'll weigh that against cost. Sure. I mean, you wouldn't be doing your due diligence if you didn't, right? Now, mind you, if you're primarily in the Azure cloud, you're probably going to continue to use it. I've got customers that are primarily in AWS. Are they going to all of a sudden move everything over to Azure to use OpenAI? No, but they like it, and so they're experimenting by sending the API calls from AWS over to Microsoft and bringing it back. I mean, most customers are probably the hybrid cloud, especially big ones. Whereas smaller ones are gonna say, it's just easier for me to stay here, I don't have to train people on these different skill sets in terms of infrastructure and stuff like that.